Welcome to the AI Hustle Podcast, the podcast where we break down the latest in AI news, tools, and interview experts helping you hustle and do more using AI. If you've been following the podcast for a while, you'll know that over the last 6 months, I've been working on a stealth AI startup. Of the hundreds of projects I've covered, this is the one that I believe has the greatest potential. So today I'm excited to announce AIBox. AIBox is a no-code AI app building platform paired with the App Store for AI that lets you monetize your AI tools. The platform lets you build apps by linking together AI models like ChatGPT, Midjourney, and 11 Labs. Eventually will integrate with software like Gmail, Trello, and Salesforce, so you can use AI to automate every function in your organization. To get notified when we launch and be one of the first to build on the platform, you can join the waitlist at aibox.ai. The link is in the show notes. We are currently raising a seed round of funding. If you're an investor that is focused on disruptive tech, I'd love to tell you more about the platform. You can reach out to me at jaden@aibox.ai. I'll leave that email in the show notes. All right, welcome to the podcast today. Today we have the honor of interviewing Marina Cortes. She is a venture capitalist based out of Toronto. She went to school in South Korea. So thank you so much for coming on the show today and being here with us. And would you mind telling the audience a little bit about your background and what kind of got you into venture capital to begin with?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me on the show. My name is Marina Cortes. I'm an alumni from Seoul National University in South Korea. I studied medicine over there. And what got me into venture capital was simply my love for startups. I started, with pre-commercialized startups, and eventually I made my way on the investment side. I worked on both consulting on the buyer and sell side, and also stayed in pure venture capital. I worked for a different firm throughout my career. I worked as an AI investor as well, and currently I'm an investor with Intrinsic Venture Capital in Calgary, Western Canada.
Very cool. So you said your love for startups kind of brought you into this. I'm super curious though, right? Because if you studied medicine, like what did that look like? Did you have experience with a startup at the beginning, or like how did you kind of make that pivot or find that, I don't know, that interest in startups?
Um, so what really fascinated me was the way that research can turn into a larger project, and how do you make impact into human health. And I really wanted to have my biotech startup when I was younger, and eventually I ended up on the investor side. And I've worked with pre-commercialized startup with professors that are trying to spin out their research, out of the lab, and how do I
Okay.
commercialize this? How do I scale up? And so that for me, that really draws me into investment. And then I realized that, when you're on the investor side, you also tend to make a bigger impact
Hmm.
because then you oversee a portfolio of startups. So I thought this is, quite interesting to have a greater impact on a greater scale more
Very
generally.
cool. Yeah, and like you were mentioning, right? Right now, there's a lot of different changes happening in venture capital, and of course, one of the biggest shifts I think I'm seeing today is just the interest in AI in general. I guess the last couple years, venture capital had a bit of a rough spot, and funding new companies and whatnot. What are you seeing as far as, I guess, a general landscape on venture capital and AI, and what does that look like today?
The venture capital landscape currently is being affected by the economy and the AI landscape, which is it's impacting founders eventually down the road. Um, Currently, there are a lot of deals that are really, really interesting on the tech side. You have tech that can help the elderly. You have tech that can be helpful for fintech payments. All of that is going to revolutionize the way that we function and the way that you work on your day to day life, but it's also going to help on the professional side. So whenever you go to your doctors visit, doctors will spend less time working on the paperwork because they are going to have some help with like AI tools, for example, and
Right.
spend more time with the patient. Now the problem with venture capital is that we do face an economic downturn at the moment, and so it's very difficult to deploy capital, and there are many levels that upstream from us from our limited partners, as well with the economic outlook right now that is not really bright. So this is making it very difficult for founders to raise at the moment.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And I've talked to a bunch of founders that I'm friends with in my within my circle and whatnot, and I am hearing, I guess, a bit of a silver lining on the fact that some of my friends who recently raised just for regular startups of course, really big struggle. And then they said, you know, as or other ones that have started shifting and starting these AI startups, there's a lot more perhaps interest. I'm not sure what the rate of closing is necessarily, but there is a lot of interest there. From your end, um, when you're kind of looking at some of these AI startups, there seems to be a lot right now that are coming across your table and those kind of deals. What factors are you looking for, or are you considering to tell how viable one of these AI startups is?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So when you invest in AI, you tend to be on the responsible investor side. I mean, I know that a lot of investors are being responsible, but what I look at is how responsible is the tech. And this is something that's very dear to me. I'm very much into investing in founders that don't brand their company as AI, where they are boring AI, for example. I want to see really AI that is part of the core technology.
Hmm.
And I also want to see AI that is explainable AI. Do they understand fully the model that they have built? Do they have a thorough understanding of the results that is being outputted by the model? Also on the data set side, this is something that's very, very important on the health side because I do invest in health quite extensively. And so when I look at AI in health, I want to make sure that the data set was trained across a number of patients that is representing the whole population, not just into one gender or not just across one ethnicity. I want to make sure that, the whole data set is representing the full scope of the technology if, if this is targeting, for example, diagnostic and such because it's well known that you will have different reactions, based on certain genetic background. And this is very, very complicated on the health side because we do have a lot of factors that are coming up. But generally the optic here is that I want to make sure that they thought about everything when they give the data to their AI models and that they understand what they're building.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I love that because when you look at when you look at drugs getting approval in the U.S. And they go through that rigorous process, for example, they have to do their case studies and they have to do their clinical trials and whatnot on a very diverse group of people. And so I think, like you're saying, with medical in particular, but then with a lot of other areas, if you have these AI models specifically trained on one data set that isn't inclusive of all of that, like look, like the regulators are going to want it eventually anyway. So I think that's really forward thinking that you're already thinking about that and making sure that people are incorporating that. And it goes for medical, but it goes for a lot of other areas too, where you really want a very diverse data set. Otherwise, your AI is going to be, really one sided and it's not going to be a very fleshed out solution. So that's very cool. What are you seeing like as far as the areas that you think AI is going to impact the most in the future? Obviously, healthcare, very big, and you're very dialed into that. What are you seeing there or perhaps any other areas?
I think that AI will impact healthcare a lot because currently you know, there's definitely a lot of work to do in health and it's very much paper based. It has, a lot of things to catch up on. But space technology is also very much in line to be impacted a lot by AI. We do
Really?
have yeah, there's a lot of data analytics that comes from the satellites and,
Mm.
there's a lot of data that is being untouched right now. And so you need to make sense of those data. And so AI is very helpful for that. Um, I'm very much a fan of space technology. And I think that climate as well is being impacted, the way that we look at climate change, like carbon capture and all those models for carbon capture, it's being powered by AI. And so you want to see a little bit more of what's going to happen there. Um, this is quite interesting because I think this is a very genuine approach to look at carbon capture and then what do I do with the carbon? Do I transform this? Like, how do I store it? Um,
Hmm.
and there are very, very interesting models now where they capture the carbon and then they have a specific model to capture the carbon at very highly efficient rate. Then they recycle this into something else like byproduct for the cosmetic industry and all that. So this is quite cool. And we talk about a little bit about planetary health. I think this is a buzzword right now that's coming into venture capital. And I think
Hmm.
that AI will be very helpful in planetary health in general, alongside healthcare and space tech.
That's super interesting. Yeah, to be honest, I'm pretty dialed in with all the new stories and everything that's coming out in AI, and I don't believe I've seen a lot of articles or a lot of coverage on the topic of climate AI and also space anything related to there, right? Like I see fintech, obviously, or like legal or even medical. Those are really interesting. Have you seen any specific interesting startup concepts or use cases in those areas, or perhaps any others that have recently, crossed your desk, or or that have really stood out to you?
In fintech specifically?
Or I mean, I'd be really curious about space, but
Yeah.
I guess any others either.
Yeah, there's a very cool startup right now. I don't know if I should speak about the name of the startup, but because I don't know if, if you can promote or
Yeah,
not.
yeah, for
But
sure.
there's a very cool startup right now in Hawaii. I think it's a very popular name that's looking at surgical precision detection of objects in the
Mm,
cislunar. And you probably know about space junk, right? And there are a
mhm,
lot of space junk in Earth, and
yeah.
this could be a potential threat, to commercial air travel and to even sunlight avalanche and all that. And so um, right now there is the space detection. Um, um, there is also some model to capture that junk that is outside in outer space, and you can see a model of AI that will kind of detect, uh, where is the space junk, and then there's another startup that will come and it's going to be like a giant starfish to capture that that space
Oh,
junk
really?
and then
Interesting.
recycle it.
That
So
is cool.
this is really cool. But I'm a big fan of space tech, and it's being, currently it's being used for more practical application. I mean, going to Mars and all that is quite interesting, but this is really on the long run. And in the future month, what you can see is, how can I provide a model to help, for protection, defense, for wildfire, tsunami, for everything that is management of asset as well. So we can use AI to kind of calculate the amount of asset that we have into a certain geographic location. So whether this is, the amount of crop or the amount, yeah, the amount of natural resources like copper and all the things that could influence our exchange rates and the value of our money. So quite cool stuff that is happening in space tech and in fintech as well. I really like fintech. I've invested into a company in fintech actually that
Mhm.
uses AI,
Okay.
anything for authentication, lack of password, anything that can make your life a bit easier whenever you pay, because companies want you to pay quick and fast and you don't want you to
Right.
change your mind.
The less
So
friction, the higher likelihood that transaction will probably go through.
exactly. And they want you to pay everywhere. Maybe you're going to be able to buy something from your card, next. So these are quite cool technology as well that are coming out.
That's very interesting. So recently, it's been in the news a lot. In fact, Nvidia, I believe, it just kind of blipped past $1 trillion market cap. I
Yeah.
believe it might be a little bit lower than that. When you're kind
Yeah.
of looking at the AI space right now, do you feel like who do you think the big winners are? Is it going to be like the Nvidia selling the shovels, or is it like, do you think all of these software startups that are coming out right now, are they really going to be able to capitalize on this? Or I guess what's your perspective on kind of the winners in that space?
That's a good question. So, when we had the economic downturn, that really took a very bad turn with the Silicon Valley Bank, for
Yeah.
example, I thought that Brex would come up and say Brex was a startup, a few years ago, and I thought they would come up and take over these loans and
Hmm.
grab a piece of the market and then eventually expand to consumer. That seemed to be like a logical sort of event for me, but
Hmm.
then I realized that, they didn't think venture I thought they would. Yeah. And then they had like other problems on the background as well, for Silicon Valley Bank to help with the issue. But you never know what's going to happen, because if you have like a next event, what's going to happen next? Uh, what is going to be the next drama? And so
Hmm.
this is where you see, during a period of very difficult time, this is where you see the best startups that are showing up. WhatsApp was created, during one of the recession period that we had. So I think that there could be other events that would help, the startups and become very popular. Now, the power of NVIDIA, it's the chip and that they're selling. I think that they do definitely have a lot of ability to scale.
Hmm.
Um, and it really depends on their strategy. But it's right now it's a good time for a startup to think a little bit about the next 10 years and see,
Hmm.
where is the opportunity in the market.
Right. Yeah, I think that's so important, right? I've seen many startups that are literally just building on an API to OpenAI or something, and without much of a strong moat, it's definitely something you want to look at the 10 years down the line versus just like what's the quickest thing you can spin up today. Do you think so? A lot of people have accused, what's happening right now in AI as being sort of like a bubble, right? Where do you see AI compared to perhaps the last round, which was kind of like the Web3 or
Mhm.
other kind of phases we've gone through in venture capital and startups?
Where do I see this? Speaking of Web3, I think it's quite interesting because there are a lot of development right now in the metaverse,
Hmm.
and um, it's very volatile. We don't really know if this is going to pick up or not beyond what it is right now. But I see that anything that is related to Web3 and anything that is related to um, NFT and metaverse is going to be powered by the newest generation, by Gen Z is, the most active buyer right now, but then you're going to have Gen Alpha that's going to be um, spending money within, the next 10 years. And
Hmm.
so, and my daughter is a Gen Alpha. So I wonder, when she's going to be 10 years old, like what is she going to buy? Like, what is she
Right.
going to like? So it's really driven by the consumer at the end. So we need to be open minded and see what they like. I think that space is probably going to open a lot, and healthcare and to be democratized a little bit more to open, roads for startups to provide help to medical practitioner. So we'll definitely, see where this is leading. Um, Fintech is never going to die. I think it's going to be, probably even more powered by Web3 right now.
Hmm.
So probably a lot of things happening as well in fintech and insurance tech as well.
Okay, very cool. So, in your experience and from what you're kind of seeing right now, what would you say for some of these, fintech companies or any companies, any startup companies that are coming out right now, particularly in AI? What are some pitfalls that you're seeing some of these startups are making? Perhaps from the last run where we saw valuations tank a little bit. What are some pitfalls you're seeing, and what are some ways that founders can overcome those?
The main problem that I see right now in the deal flow is that founders had overinflated valuation at very small revenue. And the only advice that I can give to a founder right now is focus on generating cash uh,
Hmm.
and focus on generating revenue. And this is going to help your valuation grow the way that you want it to, because the pandemic inflated the valuation quite a lot. And so these founders that came to us was like 35x of the revenue, 45x of the revenue. You had in Silicon Valley, you had deals with like $1 million revenue and the valuation was like $45 million. How are you supposed to fund this right now, knowing that the economy is not here to support you? And from a venture capital perspective, you also have your LPs that are holding on capital calls, and you have that dormant capital, but you're not sure if you want to spend it because you don't really know if you're going to have more capital injected into your fund. So how can you fund startup and take, a lot of risk? You don't want to take risk. So that's why a lot of venture capitalists right now are evaluating startups at somewhere between the range of 6 to 9x of the revenue
Hmm.
for the valuation. It really depends, on the field, and the valuation is across the board. Whether this is like medical device or space tech, if it's capital intensive or not, there are a lot of variables that come into the calculation. But the general rule of thumb right now, it's 6 to 9x. If you don't have that revenue to show that calculation, then it's going to be difficult to raise at a higher valuation. And if you need to have a down round, to finance your startup, then um, consider it. When it comes to AI, right now there is a call by a lot of leaders. I remember that there were a letter that was signed by Elon Musk and a lot of folks as well in AI.
Hmm.
And so it's very important to show that you are different, and it's very important to show that um, you are responsible into what you're making. Seeing the greater picture is great, um, but it's showing that the market is responding to it, and showing that you understand thoroughly the technology that you're building. I think is going to help this decision a little bit faster.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that makes sense. When you're looking at these startups and particularly, some of these AI startups that are coming up right now, what are the factors that are the most important to you in like your decision making process on saying, like this looks like a very viable business moving forward? Is it the team? Is it the tech? Is it what are like the key things you're looking at?
Well, when it's early stage, the team is always going to be the deal breaker, right? It's going to be very important for us to understand who the CEO is and who the CTO is, especially for an AI startup. We want to know if the CTO has, proper training and proper experience in working with AI model, and what is the vision of the CTO? Where does he want to take the company with the tech? We're talking about models that are being trained on a certain amount of data set,
Hmm.
and the fear right now is that if you leave that model open in the wild, the AI will become smarter and smarter. And so it will train itself, eventually if you give it access to unlimited data sets. So you need to understand thoroughly what that model is doing. And I think that when you talk to the team, you want to know exactly what they think, and you want to know exactly how they build their team, how they build their tech and their strategy and their vision on the long term.
Yeah.
You want to see also if they have an understanding of responsible AI and explainable AI. Now, the team is probably the biggest part of the due diligence for early stage. Now, the product is also, the where do you want to take the product next? Like, where do you want to take this company in the next 5 years? How are you going
Hmm.
to exit? We want to understand that. Our goal is to generate return for our own investors. So we want to make sure that on the tech side, the team side, everything is logged, but also on the financial side, are you generating revenue at the moment? If not, do you have an idea on how are you going to commercialize this? And, how will you generate revenue in the future? Now, on the later stage, I think it's a little bit of a different game
Hmm.
because it tends to be very capital intensive. Server cost is very, very expensive when you have an AI company. And so
Right.
the more you grow and the more you are in need of capital. So focusing on the revenue, I think it's going to be very important. You need to show profitability of your um,
Hmm.
and depend again, which sector you're on. But I think these are the probably top.
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. When you're like looking at these, because you talk about the importance, especially with the economy, what it is today, the importance of these companies and making revenue and whatnot. But at the same time, we kind of have this huge AI wave right now. There's a ton of AI companies that are being built. A lot of these things are new and very revolutionary. When you're looking at some of these AI startups, how do you kind of, I guess, what's the balance you find between like the actual revenue it's producing, or perhaps just the disruptive potential that a startup has, right? Like maybe there's this crazy area they're trying to disrupt. There's a lot of potential, but they're just starting and the revenue's not there yet. How do you kind of strike the balance right now, particularly as we're seeing like all of these disruptive AI companies being built?
That's a good question. So actually, a lot of that question reside in the fact that your fund has a thesis, and so if your fund does not invest in pre-revenue, pre-commercialized startup, you're locked by that thesis, specifically. But if you do have the ability to invest into both, if you've established your fund as a generalist fund and that you can talk to very early stage founders, pre-seed stage or seed stage, that are either in the early traction, pre-revenue or generating some revenue, then definitely you can look at what is the bigger picture. Where do they want to take the company, and eventually, this is the CEO that we bet on. We really put a lot of time on getting to know the CEO and his understanding of the strategy. Does he understand the market? Does he understand where the need reside? How do you solve the problem that you're facing? And we always tell startup, explain to me what is the problem and how are you going to solve it with your technology? And we want to make sure that you can commercialize that solution. So you need to have a very good understanding of that equation. And this is going to be the probably 80% of the discussion. Then after that, we talk about, the tech and potentially some traction. If you have
Hmm.
great traction with corporation like NVIDIA signing a contract and all that, this is great.
Hmm.
But how much money is that generating? We're also looking at, how much profitability you can make from this early traction and how much you can capitalize on.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
we'll see the CEO.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And also, just to follow up on that, as we're seeing like a lot of these disruptive technologies come out, you've spoken a lot to the fact that it's important to make sure that these are responsible AI, and we're really focusing on that. I think that's super critical. When you look at, and of course, I think self-governing in a way, whether that's from the startup or from the investors, incredibly important. But there's a third player in this, and I would be curious to hear what your thoughts are on where you see regulation in AI going. If you see what do you see that relationship looking like with companies and investors in the future?
This is a very interesting question. So regulation will come from the government, and my question is, how much does the government understand about AI?
Hmm.
And and I think this is not an easy question to answer because even for us who are investing in AI, even for us who have like a technical background and a specialization, a scientific specialization, such as health and AI or space tech and AI, it's very difficult for us to understand where is this going to go? How far is AI going to go? And what would regulation do? That's also another question that the government would answer. Um, we had that type of issues in the past with privacy when the privacy law changed in Europe, where they installed all this regulation for privacy, and the data has to stay in the country, and then you cannot share privacy data, and etc. Which was fine, but for AI, it's a much more complex issue. You need to understand how far can you go with it, and what can the government do? Is the government going to stop AI on the privacy level? Is the government going to stop AI on the amount of data set that is being fed for training? Um, you know, is are they going to put limitation as to where AI can go? The problem of AI is that the more data you give it, and the smarter it gets. And so
Hmm.
I think this is going to be very difficult for government to answer. On how do you prevent AI from going nuts? And um, you know, you throw a bucket of water on it. You probably saw
Hmm.
that OpenAI had a job opening, and they were looking for somebody to stop the server in case it goes nuts.
Right.
And so it's a physical issue at the end, right? Now, it's not a software developer issue, but um, this is going to be very difficult, I think, for a government body to understand what AI does and to put limitation and regulation on it. I think the regulation would be very, very high level, if any. And,
Hmm.
such as, the data set must stay in the country and some server geographic location, probably some trade as well. The same way that they've implemented the trade programs and, the trade agreements for the exchange of goods, probably they might be able to do the same thing for data to protect the asset because data has a value.
Hmm.
Um, they, they can probably think at, this type of creative solution. But enforcing responsible AI and explainable AI is going to be a very gray zone that they need to define, for example. So I think investors play a lot of role into showing a leadership here on how do you build a model that is responsible and that is explainable.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think when you talk about being explainable and having that transparency, I think that's going to be a big thing for consumers and regulators as well, and also corporations incorporating it, right? Like you don't want to use an AI on your back end or for one of your products if it's not transparent and there's biases in the data and you're unable to identify where that's at. So I think that's really critical. Kate, my one other question for you that I'm just super curious your thoughts on. So we're seeing like OpenAI and we're seeing Google right now, and there's a couple other big ones, right? We have these people with these huge data sets that are training, and they've grabbed this data. Now they're going to Congress, like we saw Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, say, "Hey, we need to regulate this more." And I I'm wondering what your perspective is on will we see any more of these big AI models like OpenAI and Google, or are we seeing the end of that with them going and saying we should regulate this? And in addition, previously OpenAI, they were able to like, for example, they grabbed all of Twitter and all of Reddit and incorporate it into their model. Now Reddit says you got to pay us. Stack Overflow says you got to pay us. Twitter cut it off. Um, are we kind of seeing the end of these massive AI models just because all of these companies realize their data is super valuable and regulation is coming in? Or do you think it will become more like a commodity and we'll see like many more of those?
I think it will become more common to have the super model showing up because data, it's something that you can put a price tag on.
Hmm.
And you've seen many companies that are being bought over not because they are generating revenue, but because they had a certain amount of data set. Um, and and the price tag for these companies were in millions of dollars. I don't see it as being the end of it. Even if um, a model like OpenAI is not generating like a lot of revenue at the moment, although I don't know their financial situation, data is the next oil. So you really, I think that this is not going to stop the market into creating other models and into seeing an opportunity here to create something that's lucrative. Um, I think that OpenAI is just the beginning of what they want to release. I'm actually quite curious to see where they want to take their technology, and I think that is going to be very, very exciting. When Google started, many years ago, it was a very small thing that was starting to get popular with like the younger generation, and then now it's becoming part of your day to day life. You have your Gmail account, you have the calendar, and everything. And so you also have like data center. We can definitely see OpenAI evolving into a similar model for our younger generation. So I don't think this is going to be, and I think there's going to be like a lot more. And this is going to be quite interesting. So maybe it's not going to be affecting our life the way we see it, but maybe it's going to be more related to B2B, for corporations to be more efficient. God knows what they can come up with. But
Hmm.
I think that, we should definitely keep our eyes open. It's going to be exciting.
Very cool. Okay, so wrapping up, just one last question I want to ask you. On the podcast, we have a lot of investors listening. We also have a lot of founders that are currently actively building startups. And I'm wondering if you have a piece of advice that you would give to AI startups and startup founders specifically right now that are building and looking for advice on raising venture capital for their startup.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, eventually at the moment you want to be different and you want to show how different you are and how well you're solving a problem. If you want to talk to me, let's talk about responsible and explainable AI. And the general rule of thumb, I think, to raise money with venture capital is to show that the market is paying into it and that there is a large potential to monetize what you're building. So I would definitely, consider how do you try to think on, how are you going to generate revenue and how are you going to turn that company into a 10x investment for your investors?
That's great advice. The 10x I think is really important because at the end of the day, you got to know what the investors are looking for and what they're trying to return to their LPs. So I think that's really
Absolutely.
really powerful advice. Thank you so much, Marina, for being on the podcast with us today, for your incredible insights and views into AI. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. If you are looking for an innovative and creative community of people using ChatGPT, you need to join our ChatGPT creators community. I'll drop a link in the description to this podcast. We'd love to see you there where we share tips and tricks of what is working in ChatGPT. It's a lot easier than a podcast as you can see screenshots, you can share and comment on things that are currently working. So if this sounds interesting to you, check out the link in the comment. We'd love to have you in the community. Thanks for tuning in to the AI Hustle podcast. If you could do us a massive favor, we would really, really appreciate it if you could leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. This helps people find the podcast. It helps people know this is a good place to go. And we would really, really appreciate it as it helps us continue to bring on incredible guests and share incredible content for you to listen to.